Kim Shin, and he's on his knees begging for his life to change. But he's not begging her to stay, he's begging her to let him go. His wife just smirked. She told him she'd do it, but there was a catch. She sat there completely in control of the situation. Then this woman put her foot on his chin and asked him what he could possibly give her in return. Shin just looked up completely broken. This was his life. And it wasn't just his wife. Shin hated his father too. The man was always either drunk or gambling. He never once got any support from him. All the bastard ever did was demand more alcohol. But Shin never cut ties with the man. After his mother passed, his father was the only family he had left. He remembered the days when he had to work every part-time job he could find just to make ends meet. He was always running, always trying to keep up. No matter how tired he was, he always put on a smile for the customers. One day, a father dining with his son called him over. The little boy had spilled some water. As the kid played, he accidentally splashed water all over Shin's face. Shin just smiled and told them it was okay, that he'd clean it up, but seeing them together so happy, he couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy. He envied the simple life they had, a life he felt he could never reach. Those memories felt like a lifetime ago. And then one day his father showed up with a crazy demand. He wanted 10 million won. Shin was floored. 10 million won, that was a huge amount of money. His father got angry, yelling that he was asking for it because it was a lot. He promised he'd multiply it several times over and pay him back. He started rambling about something called coin, claiming it was the currency of the future. He was convinced it was a guaranteed way to make huge money. But Shin wasn't buying it. He told his father that the money he earned with his own sweat meant more to him than some crazy scheme. That's when his father grabbed him, his tone changing completely. He begged Shin to just trust him this one time. He admitted he'd never been reliable, that he was always drunk and a worthless mess. He pleaded for a chance to change, to finally be different. And Shin just stood there, listening to the desperate words of the man who was supposed to be his dad. He begged his son to give him just one last chance. Shin knew better. His gut told him not to lend the money, not to trust him. But there was a tiny part of him that just kept wondering, what if? What if just maybe they could go back to being a normal family again? So he caved. He told his dad he'd do it. He just wanted to believe in his father one last time. His father grabbed him in a huge hug, thanking him over and over again for trusting him. Then the old man started laughing, yelling about how they were going to be rich now. Shin just watched, feeling a pit in his stomach. That was the last time Shin ever saw him, not long after his father was gone. The cause of death was a traffic accident. Shin stood there in his black suit, a mourner for the man who had just promised him riches. They said his father's car slipped on a rainy road, and he was gone instantly. Shin paid his respects, and honestly it was a weird feeling. He was sad to lose his father, but at the same time, he felt free. After everything was over, he was alone again. He poured himself a drink, the silence of the apartment feeling heavy. He just sat there thinking about how twisted his life had become. He sighed and turned on his computer, just looking for something to watch. A video popped up from a creator called Jackpotman. The host was interviewing some young guy named Lee Youngwoo who'd apparently made a fortune. When asked what he did, the guest just smiled and said he worked in investments. Shin was just eating, half watching the interview. The host, this guy called Jackpotman, asked his guest just how much money he'd made. When the guest Lee Youngwoo casually said he had about 4 billion won, Shin literally spat out his food. The host was blown away and wanted to know what he invested in. Lee Youngwoo smiled and said it was something everyone had heard of. Bitcoin. Shin froze. Coin. That was the same thing his dad had invested in. His heart started pounding. He thought maybe he should check it. Back on the screen, the host asked a hypothetical. He wondered how much the coin would have grown if someone had invested 6 years ago, right when it first came out. Lee Youngwoo just laughed, saying that was a fun thing to imagine. He explained that back then, nobody could have guessed the prices would climb so high. He then laid out the math. If someone had invested 6 years ago, their money would have grown at least 2,500 times. Shin's mind just went blank. On the screen, the host and guest were losing their minds, celebrating the Bitcoin explosion. Shin stared down at his phone, completely frozen. He had logged into the account his dad made. The number he was looking at, it was in the billions. He was just a guy in a tiny apartment, eating a simple meal. But according to his phone, Kim Shin's current assets were now measured in billions of won. He tried to go about his day like normal, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. He couldn't wrap his head around it. He was now worth over 20 billion won. The problem was he couldn't stop watching the numbers. The price was swinging wildly up and down by tens of millions every few minutes. Every time it went up, he was ecstatic. But when it dropped, it felt like his entire world was falling apart. He just gained an amount of money that would have taken him 40 years of saving to earn. It all happened in an instant. He knew if he sold right then, he'd be set for life. But the price was still climbing. The greed was starting to creep in, making him question if selling was the right move. He got back to his tiny apartment, and the sight of cockroaches scattering on the floor was a harsh dose of reality. He was a billionaire, but this was still his life. He sat down, forcing himself to think clearly. He'd lived his whole life with nothing. Even if the price dropped a little, what he had was already a fortune. He just needed to stay calm. He stared at the screen, the noise in his head finally starting to quiet down. He took a deep breath. He was done letting his emotions run the show. It was time to make a choice. His hand hovered over the mouse. The greedy part of his brain was screaming at him, telling him to hold on for just one more big jump. He couldn't believe his eyes. Just a little while ago, the price was sitting at 23.55 million. He'd only stepped away for a moment to get some fresh air. But in that short time, the price had shot up by another $2 million. That was another billion won just like that. Our boy looked like his soul was leaving his body. Sometime later, he was back at his day job, trying to act like a normal person. He was in a meeting, and his manager was asking for an update on a deal in Busan. The manager explained that the Busan team wasn't doing well, and they needed someone to go handle a product demo. Turns out, the guy who was supposed to go on Changjin had a family emergency and couldn't make it. The question hung in the air. Who was going to take the trip to Busan? From the looks on everyone's faces, nobody was jumping at the chance. That's when Kim Shin spoke up, volunteering to go to Busan himself. The manager looked at him, concerned. The guy had massive dark circles under his eyes. Shin just waved it off, saying he'd be fine. He admitted he hadn't slept all weekend and figured a trip might actually help clear his head. The manager agreed, saying he trusted Shin to handle it. But he decided they'd need one more person for the job. And that's when Sua stood up and said she'd go with him. Hilariously, as soon as she volunteered, every other guy in the room suddenly wanted to go to Busan too. Even the team leader tried to pull rank. But the manager shut everyone down. He announced that 2 people were enough and the team would be Kim Shin and Sua. The 2 of them shared a look across the table. And just like that, they were on their way. Turns out Sua was the one driving. She glanced over at Shin in the passenger seat and thanked him for coming with her. Shin complimented her car. Sua smiled and explained she got it from her brother last year, saying he sold it to her for cheap. She seemed really excited, telling him that Busan was her hometown. She admitted she hadn't been back much since she started getting busy with CrossFit and study groups. Shin listened quietly. He couldn't help but think about how different their lives were. Even in her free time, she was focused on getting better. As they drove into the city, Shin thought about his own life. For him, dreams and hopes were luxuries he could never afford. He trained himself not to want things he couldn't have. But now, with billions in his account, everything was different. For the first time, he started to wonder, what kind of world do people with that much money actually live in? They finally arrived in Busan as the sun was setting over the water. After a long drive, one of them offered the other a canned coffee. Shin thanked Sua for all her help on the trip, but she just smiled and said it was all thanks to him leading the way. Then she got this serious look on her face, like she was working up the courage to ask something. She asked if he would stop by a department store with her. Shin seemed a little confused by the random request. She explained that since they were in her hometown, she wanted to shop a little. But more importantly, she had something to tell him in private. Shin thought about it for a second. He figured a change of pace couldn't hurt, so he agreed to go. So they headed over to a massive department store in the city. They ended up in the men's section, surrounded by expensive suits. Shin was still confused, wondering why they'd come here when online shopping is so much cheaper. That's when Sua asked if he would like to pick out a suit for himself. Sua told him she wanted to buy him a suit. Shin was completely caught off guard, asking why she would suddenly buy him clothes. She looked away, blushing. She admitted she had a shameless favor to ask and that the suit was basically a bribe. Shin wasn't having it. He told her to just ask the favor first, making it clear he could afford his own clothes. Sua was so embarrassed she couldn't even look at him, hiding her face behind the clothes rack. Finally, she peeked over the clothes and just came out with it. She asked him to pretend to be her boyfriend in front of her parents. Shin was completely stunned. She explained that her younger sister was dating someone, and now her parents wouldn't stop nagging her to bring a boyfriend home too. Our boy's brain just short-circuited. He was totally overwhelmed by the request. Later that night, they ended up at a fancy restaurant overlooking the city. Sua's mother was happily telling stories, explaining how her daughter could be clumsy and stubborn, even though she seemed smart. She even teased that it must be hard for Shin to date someone like her. Sua was so embarrassed she could barely speak, yelling for her mom to stop. Her parents asked if he worked at the same company, and Shin confirmed he did. When they asked how he and their daughter became close, Shin came up with a smooth answer. He explained that he helped guide her when she first joined the company, and that's how they got to know each other. Sua's mother seemed pleased and told him to eat more. But as he ate, the whole situation reminded him of something else. He remembered meeting his ex-wife's parents last spring. The memory was cold. He was sitting with Kiwon and her parents, and her father had bluntly asked what his parents did for a living. The memory of that dinner was just awful. Back in that memory, Shin had to explain that both of his parents had passed away. Without missing a beat, his father-in-law callously asked if he was raised by grandparents or in an orphanage. Shin just had to sit there and explain that his father was alive until he was in college. In the memory, his mother-in-law had started grilling him, asking if he lived alone in an apartment. The questions were relentless. They wanted to know if his parents had left him a house, why he didn't own one, and even demanded to know his salary and bonuses. Then came the real kicker. His mother-in-law brought up the allowance their daughter gave them and demanded that Shin keep sending them money every month after the wedding. He remembered just agreeing to it, promising to take care of them. But no matter how hard he tried to win them over, it was never enough. Snapping back to the present, the difference was like night and day. Sua's parents were warm and kind. Her mother noticed he'd gone quiet and asked if he didn't like the food. He quickly smiled and told her it was delicious. But then he decided to be honest. He admitted that he had been married before. After dinner, her parents said their goodbyes, telling them to enjoy their date. As Shin bowed, he thought about how different things were now. If it wasn't for the money, for the security it gave him, he wouldn't have the pride to stand there like this. As they were leaving, Sua's mom leaned in and whispered something that made Sua's entire face turn bright red. She told her daughter she didn't have to come home that night. Her mom just laughed, waving them off and telling them to go have fun. Sua looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. As they walked away, her mom wasn't done. She yelled back at Shin, telling him she wanted her first grandchild to be a girl. Sua was so embarrassed she just screamed for her mom to stop. After they finally left, Shin was left standing there. He looked up at the city lights, noticing all the neon signs for hotels and motels. The whole situation was pretty awkward. Meanwhile, her parents walked away arm in arm. Her dad asked how she felt about everything, and her mom just said that as long as Suwa was happy, she was happy too. They were just good people. After all that, Shin took a moment to just look out at the ocean. The city lights were bright, and the whole night felt kind of strange. But then Suwa suddenly bowed deeply. She apologized, looking really serious about it. Shin was totally caught off guard. He asked her what was wrong, wondering why she was saying sorry all of a sudden. She explained that she saw his face during dinner. She was worried she'd brought up painful memories for him. He immediately understood. She was worried about his divorce. He told her not to worry, that it wasn't her fault at all. He insisted that her parents were great and the food was incredible, so she really had nothing to apologize for. But she still looked like she felt bad. So to change the subject, he came up with an idea. He asked if she could show him around Hyundai since it was his first time in Busan. Her mood completely changed. She immediately started thinking, promising to plan the absolute perfect tour for him. As they walked, Shin could see Suwa was still lost in thought. He suggested they stop somewhere along the way, trying to figure out what to do next. He just watched her, a small smile on his face. She stood there by the water, still thinking. He chuckled and teased her, saying her mom was right about her being stubborn. That seemed to snap her out of it. Her eyes lit up as she pointed at something, insisting that this one was her treat. She looked totally excited about her idea. Shin looked over, completely baffled. He had no idea what she was pointing at. Turns out she was pointing at a fortune teller's tent. He was definitely not expecting that. Next thing he knew, they were sitting inside. The fortune teller looked right at Suwa and told her she had a very bright and clean energy. The woman told Suwa that she was talented, hardworking, and destined to be blessed with luck her whole life. Suwa was thrilled to hear that. Shin, on the other hand, looked completely unimpressed. But then the fortune teller added a warning. She said Suwa had missed a big opportunity recently because she didn't have enough courage. Suwa went quiet, thinking about what the woman had just said. Shin just thought to himself that this was the kind of vague stuff anyone could say. The fortune teller wasn't done. She told Suwa not to worry because the opportunity she missed would come back even bigger. But this time, it wouldn't be as easy to grab. Hearing that, Suwa's excitement faded. She thought it all sounded too vague and decided fortune-telling probably wasn't worth trusting. With her turnover, she looked at Shin and told him he was next. He just looked surprised and quickly said he was fine, passing on the offer. Suwa tried to encourage him, saying the fortune-teller seemed pretty convincing, but Shin still wasn't interested. He didn't really have anything he wanted to ask her. Suwa confirmed she was done asking questions, but the fortune-teller's eyes were now fixed completely on Shin. And then out of nowhere, she told him he had the face of someone who was meant to starve to death. Shin was completely floored. She then asked if he grew up poor. Shin couldn't believe it. How could she possibly know that about him? But then she completely changed her tone. She said that people like him are actually blessed with enormous fortune. She told him that from now on, luck would just keep rolling in on its own. She paused for a moment, letting her words hang in the air. She gave him one final piece of advice. If he traveled the world and had a lot of new experiences, he would find and grab even more luck along the way. Shin just stood there, taking it all in. But Shin wasn't thinking about love. He was remembering his past. For him, a life of crushing poverty was just the way things were. Because of that, he'd spent his whole life worrying only about money. He snapped out of it with a small smile. He told her that even if it wasn't true, it felt nice to hear good things. Then he asked how much he owed her. The price was 200,000 won. Shin's eyes went wide in disbelief. For the old him, that was an insane amount of money. It was enough for socks, bus fare, and even heating bills. But now he just handed it over. Later that night, the two of them were walking along the beach. Suwa turned to him and asked if he'd ever tried eel. She excitedly announced their next stop was Hyundai Market. As she pulled him along, Shin was still thinking about how much his life had changed since he came into his fortune. As Suwa pulled him along, Shin was lost in thought. He wondered if money could really make a person happy. He didn't have the answer yet. But as he looked at the city lights, something felt different. For the first time in his life, he was actually looking forward to what was coming next. Just like that, their 4-day business trip in Busan came to an end. It was time to return to Seoul. Back in the city, someone was getting to work. He was focused, clicking away at his computer. His eyes were glued to the screen, tracking every single movement. It was Kim Shin. Despite all the money, he was back in a simple room watching the coin charts like a hawk. He was kicking himself. If he had just sold a little earlier, he wouldn't be down 200 million won. But then just as quickly, the numbers started climbing again. In just 1 hour, the value shot up by millions. He finally let out a long breath. Ever since he got back from his trip, he'd been completely glued to the screen. The constant stress of watching the charts all weekend was really messing with his head. He kept asking himself the same question over and over. Should he sell or keep holding on? He decided to check just one more time. The weekend finally came to an end. Back at the office, a colleague came up to him. He mentioned hearing that the apartment Shin bought had already gone up in value by 300 million, adding that real estate was always the best investment. Shin just took a sip of his coffee. It had been another sleepless night. While his colleagues made small talk, Shin was lost in his own world. His holdings had hit 40 billion won yesterday. He couldn't help but wonder if it was finally time to sell. One of the guys started teasing him about his trip to Busan with Suwa. Shin just waved it off, insisting it was strictly for work. His colleague kept pushing, joking that it must have been better than hanging out with them. Shin didn't even bother to answer. The topic shifted to the stock market. Someone asked team leader On how his stocks were doing. On just sighed, admitting he was still a long way from breaking even. But then the colleague mentioned that the real money was in something called Bitcoin. The word immediately cut through Shin's exhaustion. They started doing the math out loud. The price had gone up 8 times since the start of the year. One of them realized that a 10 million won investment would be worth 80 million now. The fear of missing out started to kick in. One of them argued that sitting around while everyone else was making money was the dumbest thing they could do. The hype was real. One guy was so sure about it he was thinking of using his overdraft account. Hearing that, another decided to throw in his recently matured savings. They were all ready to jump in, completely clueless. While his colleagues were getting all hyped up, Shin just stood there listening. They had no idea what was really going on. He was in a completely different league. This wasn't a game for him. And deep down, a voice was screaming at him. It told him Bitcoin was going to climb even higher, that he just had to hold on a little longer. He remembered the feeling. Every day was the same. He'd check the screen, convinced that today was the day it would hit the peak. And every day, the number just kept climbing into the billions. He watched his colleagues, thinking about how easily they were swayed by the flow of money. He was sure this was just the beginning. More and more people were about to jump in. All he had to do was wait a little longer. But then while checking the charts at home, his eyes went wide. Something was terribly wrong. The market had been holding steady, and then it completely fell off a cliff. His hand trembled over the mouse. Bitcoin had plunged from over $7,000 down to $6,300. He had just lost $1 billion in an instant. He just stared at the screen, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. The pressure was crushing. The next day, he sat outside the office, letting out a long, tired breath. He tried to distract himself, quietly noting that the weather was nice. But his mind was somewhere else entirely. He was thinking about the money, 6 billion won. That was basically 145 years of his salary. It was an amount so huge it felt unreal. His hand trembled as he clutched his phone. He stared at the screen, sweating. The same question kept spinning in his head, should he just sell now? Part of him was screaming to just do it. He still had 34 billion won. It was more than enough. He just needed to stop being greedy and sell. He was so lost in thought, he'd started mumbling out loud. That's when one of his colleagues walked up and asked him what he was talking about. Shin jumped, completely startled. It was his colleague Kim Sangi. The guy just laughed and asked why he looked so shocked to see him. But Sangi's eyes flicked down to Shin's phone. He saw the red screen of the crypto trading app. Sangi got this little smirk on his face. He'd definitely seen the app. He asked Shin straight up if he'd started trading Bitcoin. Our boy completely froze. Another colleague chimed in, asking how much Shin could have possibly invested to be making such a long face. Shin was thinking about his 34 billion won. He just mumbled that he had about 34 in it. Of course, he left out the most important word. Sangi tried to cheer him up, assuming he meant 34 million. He told him not to worry because it would go up soon. Shin just stared back, completely confused, and asked if they hadn't seen the huge crash yesterday. The two of them just looked at each other, not getting why he was so worried. Then a moment later, they both started to smile. Sangi pulled out his own phone, looking smug. He asked Shin why he was smiling like that, telling him he was way behind on the news. He shoved his phone right in Shin's face, telling him to look at the current price. Shin stared at the screen. He couldn't believe it. After that huge drop, the price had somehow shot right back up. The poor guy was so relieved, tears started welling up in his eyes. He broke down completely, just muttering his thanks. Sangi just patted him on the head, trying to calm him down. This guy told Shin not to lose heart and to just keep holding. He was convinced the real surge was just getting started. Shin just listened, wondering where all this confidence came from. Turns out Sangi had put in 500 million, and another guy had cleaned out his emergency fund for 50 million. And here Shin was, terrified of another crash with tens of billions on the line. He had a serious choice to make. Should he listen to them and hold on just a little bit longer? And just like that, the entire country got swept up in Bitcoin fever. It was a full-blown gold rush. News stories were everywhere, talking about new billionaires and how even high school kids were getting rich overnight. The price didn't just climb, it exploded. Headlines everywhere announced that Bitcoin had hit $15,000, even surpassing gold as a store of value. And it just kept going. Another surge hit, pushing the price even higher. It shot past $19,000. It felt like money was literally falling from the sky. While the world was going crazy, Shin was just trying to keep his cool. But when he finally checked his own account, the number he saw was just impossible. He could barely get the words out. 100 billion? The number was so big it didn't even feel real. He clutched his chest, his hands shaking. He kept asking himself if it was a dream. Did he really just make 100 billion won? The shock finally broke and Kim Shin just started laughing. It was the only thing he could do. The laughter slowly died down, but the feeling was still there. It was just too much to take in. He took a deep breath, trying to force himself to calm down. But then a cold thought cut through the excitement. He reminded himself that until he sold, none of this was actually his money. His hands were shaking, covered in sweat. It was time. He had to make the call right now. The question echoed in his mind. Sell now and secure the fortune, or keep holding on for more. He was completely torn. The pressure was crushing him. He had no idea what to do. The stress was so intense, it felt like his soul was literally leaving his body. But a voice in his head, the voice of pure greed, was screaming at him. It told him to hold on, asking why he'd ever get off when the price was still climbing. The voice kept pushing, reminding him that he was earning hundreds of billions every single day. It questioned if he was really going to throw away a chance like this. This was the time to be greedy. The pressure was completely twisting him up inside. He was exhausted, defeated. He weakly agreed. He made his decision. He wasn't going to sell. He was going to keep holding. Suddenly, a memory hit him. It was his dad's voice, full of excitement, promising that he was finally going to hit it big. He remembered that day perfectly. He was just sitting on the floor of his tiny room, staring at the computer. He looked over at the framed picture on his shelf. This all started because of him. It was his dad, the man who started this whole crazy thing. He remembered his father's voice desperately begging for money. He was promising that if he won big with this new thing called Bitcoin, he'd buy Shin everything. The answer had been there the whole time. He'd made his choice. The next day, it was business as usual at the office. One of Kim Shin's co-workers, Sua, stretched back in her chair after finishing some work. That's when she noticed Kim Shin's desk was empty. She wondered if he'd gone on a business trip. She walked over to her boss, team leader On, and handed him the meeting minutes he'd asked for. Sua took the chance to ask if Kim Shin was away on business, but the team leader explained that he'd taken a personal day off. She looked a little worried. A sudden day off wasn't like him, and she hoped nothing serious had happened. But Kim Shin wasn't having a crisis, far from it. He was starting his new life. He'd walked into a luxury car dealership. The salesman welcomed him, asking if he had a specific model in mind. Kim Shin just said he was looking around. His eyes landed on a sleek white sports car. He pointed it out, asking the salesman for the details. The salesman smiled, explaining that it was a brand new model. He listed off the specs: a Ferrari 458 Italia with a turbo SV8 engine and over 600 horsepower. Basically a monster on wheels. Kim Shin didn't even hesitate. He just said it looked good and that he'd take it. The salesman started to ask how he wanted to pay, but he stopped cold. The poor guy's eyes went wide with shock. Our boy held up a card telling him to charge the full amount. No financing, no questions, just a clean purchase. This was all possible because of one person. He silently thanked his father for snapping him out of his greed. That was the day Kim Shin sold all of his Bitcoin. The result, he was now sitting on 100 billion won all in cash. His life had completely changed. He was young, he was rich, and for the first time he had everything. But standing alone in his tiny room, he had to ask himself, what was he supposed to do with all this money? Back at the dealership, the staff thanked him for choosing their brand. They promised to call him as soon as the car was ready for delivery. As he walked out, the entire staff bowed, wishing him a good day. It was a level of respect he'd never experienced before. He walked out of the dealership, each step feeling heavy and unreal. Then he just stopped. It was all hitting him at once. The realization washed over him. He'd actually done it. He just bought a car worth almost $500 million. It felt insane. Not long ago, he was trembling over spending a few dollars on socks or a new shirt. This was the first time in his entire life he had ever spent money like this. He took a deep breath, just letting it all sink in. He'd kept a list of things he always wanted to do if he ever got rich. A custom suit, a luxury car paid in full. He was finally making those old college dreams come true. With one item checked off, he knew exactly what was next. A luxury apartment. So he went straight to a real estate office to find one. The agents greeted him warmly as soon as he walked in, asking what kind of property he was interested in. Kim Shin walked in, pulling a suitcase behind him. He told them he wanted to lease a new, spacious apartment with a perfect view of the Han River. The two agents exchanged a look. This guy was clearly looking for something top tier. They promised to show him the perfect place right away, and they had just the building in mind. The agent explained that the complex was just built last year. Then she dropped the price. The lease for this unit was 5 billion won. She led him through the grounds, pointing out all the luxuries: walking trails, gardens, pools, and gyms. This place had everything. Kim Shin was just trying to take it all in. So this is how the other half lives. The agent led him towards the elevator, telling him the apartment was on the 11th floor. They got to the door, which had a fancy key card lock. The agent opened the door and asked if the size was okay. Kim Shin was speechless. The place was massive. He thought to himself, you could probably run laps in here. The agent pointed out that everything was fully furnished with the best materials. Kim Shin was just staring at the kitchen, wondering what he'd even do with a dishwasher. She mentioned there were 2 bathrooms, one in the master bedroom and another down the hall. That's when it really hit him. The bathroom alone was bigger than his entire old apartment. He asked a simple question: did they get pests here? The agent just smiled and told him that even mosquitoes couldn't make it up this high. The agent then showed him the main attraction. He walked over to the windows and slid the door open. The view was absolutely incredible, a perfect sunset over the Han River. He stepped out onto the balcony, just taking it all in. He was completely blown away. This was it. This was the life he could have now. The agent asked what he thought, offering to show him a smaller place if this one was too much. But Kim Shin turned around with a smile. He told her this one was perfect. He was taking it. He thought about an old saying: if you're not happy, maybe you just don't have enough money. And just like that, he signed the papers. He knew that from now on, he wouldn't have to give up on anything because of money. The agent confirmed everything was set and asked how he'd like to handle the payment. He put his briefcase on the table. He told them he wanted to pay for the entire lease all at once. Then he opened it up. It was filled with stacks of cash. He was paying for the whole thing right now. This was just another item on his list of dreams. Get a suit, buy a car, and pay for an apartment lease entirely in cash. The agents were speechless. They couldn't believe he'd been carrying around that much money the whole time. Our boy just calmly asked for a receipt for the fee. He was done holding back. From this day forward, he was going to do everything he'd ever dreamed of. Sometime later, back at the office, a couple of his colleagues were chatting in the break room. The guy asked her what she thought of the restaurant from the night before. She told him the food and the vibe were great. He smiled, saying he knew an even better place with a breathtaking night view. He leaned in, trying to be smooth, and asked her if she wanted to find out tonight. But just then the door swung open, someone walked in and they both froze. The guy looked completely busted. It was Sua and she did not look happy at all. The colleague stumbled back, clearly flustered by her presence. Without a word, Sua walked right up and stepped hard on his foot. The poor guy was terrified. She leaned in close, her expression ice cold. Then she asked him a question. She wanted to know where Kim Shin lived. The colleague, Jong-yop, looked suspicious. He asked Sua why she needed to know where Kim Shin lived, even offering to go himself. Sua explained that she just wanted to check on him. She'd heard he took the day off because he was sick and was genuinely worried. Jong-yop listened, but he looked thoughtful. He seemed to be wondering if her level of worry was normal for just a coworker. He told her he didn't know the address either, but he offered to ask Kim Shin for her. Sua immediately thanked him. So Jong-yop sent a text to Kim Shin, letting him know he wasn't feeling well. He mentioned that he and Sua wanted to stop by after work. Kim Shin was surprised by the sudden offer. Jong-yop explained that Sua was the one who was really worried. Hearing that, Kim Shin agreed and said he'd send over his address. When Jong-yop told her they could go, Sua's face lit up. She was absolutely thrilled and thanked him for his help. Watching her reaction, it all clicked for Jong-yop. He realized Sua might have feelings for Kim Shin. As Jong-yop watched her, it all made sense. The way she was acting, the level of worry, it wasn't just for coworker. He was pretty sure Sua had feelings for Kim Shin. And so after work, the two of them headed over to visit. Sua was practically glowing with excitement, carrying a little gift bag with her. On the way, they started guessing what his house would be like. Sua went first, her imagination running wild. She pictured a small, super neat apartment. She even imagined he was a great cook, living a clean and organized life all by himself. Then it was Jong-yop's turn. His guess was a little different. He figured Kim Shin was probably frugal, maybe even still living in the same old place from before his divorce. He pictured a simple, minimalist kind of life. With their guesses made, they decided to just go see for themselves. They finally got to the address Kim Shin sent over. It was a quiet, unassuming neighborhood. But when they found the actual apartment, they both just stared in disbelief. It was a semi-basement unit. This was not what either of them had expected at all. Kim Shin opened the door and thanked them for coming all the way out. The apartment was tiny, barely more than a single room. He admitted he wasn't actually sick and apologized for making them worry. As he spoke, a couple of cockroaches crawled on the wall nearby. He explained that the mess was just from moving and told them to make themselves comfortable. Jong-yop couldn't believe it. He thought it looked more like a storage room than a place to live. He also realized where that awful smell from earlier was coming from. Kim Shin noticed his reaction and quickly apologized for the smell. He explained that a nearby sewer was leaking, and no matter how much he aired the place out, the stench just wouldn't go away. Sua quickly told him not to apologize, saying that if anyone should feel sorry, it was her. She gently placed her hand on the wall and felt the damp, crumbling texture of it. She'd only ever heard about semi-basements. She never realized living in one could actually be this rough. She clenched her fist, thinking about how he'd been living like this all alone ever since the divorce. The thought of him suffering by himself this whole time really seemed to get to her. Jong-yop saw the look on her face. That's when he decided they weren't just going to stand there. He told Kim Shin they were going to help him move, and Sua immediately agreed. Kim Shin tried to protest, worried they'd get their nice clothes dirty. But they didn't care at all and just got to work, asking if this was really all the stuff he had. He was genuinely touched by their kindness. A little while later, after they'd finished packing everything up, Kim Shin thanked them both. But when they got down to the parking lot, they both just stopped and stared. Something didn't make any sense. Jong-yop and Sua stopped dead in their tracks. They just stared, completely stunned by what they saw. Sitting there in the parking lot of this rundown place was a brand new, shiny white Ferrari. It made absolutely no sense. Jong-yop figured the owner must just have some business nearby. There was no other explanation for a car like that to be here. He was dying to get a better look, but he tried to play it cool in front of Kim Shin. That's when Kim Shin pointed straight at the Ferrari and told them to load the boxes in there. Jong-yop and Sua just froze, completely confused. He asked why they were stopping in front of someone else's expensive car. Kim Shin just looked at him and calmly said it was his. The poor guy's brain just short-circuited. A Ferrari? That car costs a fortune. With upkeep that's more than most people's yearly salary. It was impossible. As Kim Shin popped the trunk, the only thing Jong-yop could think of was that he must have spent every last penny he had just to buy this car. Jong-yop was still trying to process everything. He had no idea what was going on, but he knew one thing for sure. He desperately wanted a ride in that car. As if reading his mind, Kim Shin then casually invited them to come see his new place. Their eyes lit up, they both immediately said yes. But then Kim Shin pointed out the problem. The car only had one passenger seat. Sua's face fell, she was clearly bummed out. Seeing this, Jong-yop immediately stepped up. He told them he'd just come separately. He tried to play it cool, explaining that he brought his own car anyway and would need to drive it back regardless. With that settled, he turned and told them he'd follow from behind. Jong-yop let out a heavy sigh as he walked away. The poor guy was genuinely upset. He'd wanted to ride in that car so badly. Meanwhile, Sua sat nervously in the passenger seat of the Ferrari. Kim Shin broke the silence, pointing out that this was the first time they'd been alone together since their trip to Busan. He then asked what her parents said after that. Sua explained that her parents were acting like they were about to get married. Her mom, especially, was teasing her about when she could expect a grandchild. Kim Shin chuckled and asked if she was expecting him to play the husband role too. She got flustered, quickly telling him she'd never ask for something like that. The mood shifted. Sua looked at him seriously, about to ask something important. She hesitated for a moment, then finally started to ask him how he ended up. Kim Shin pretended he didn't hear her and asked her to repeat the question. She paused for a moment, thinking about what to say. Then she just smiled and told him it was nothing, brushing it off completely. She realized it would be rude to bring up his divorce. But Kim Shin understood. He thanked her for being so considerate, saying he knew both she and Jongyop must have a lot of questions they were holding back. Sua told him she'd ask him about it all someday. To change the subject, she asked where they were headed. He just told her she'd see when they got there. The Ferrari sped through the city streets. A little while later, he pulled up to a building. It was a simple apartment with windows right at ground level. This was his old place, the semi-basement apartment he'd lived in since the divorce. A colleague had come to check on him, surprised to see him there. Kim Shin explained he was just clearing things out. On a dresser sat a photo album, almost completely empty. He held up the very last picture. It was from his wedding day. And then he just dropped it into a trash bag. He told his friend it had been 6 months. It was time to move on. Speaking of work, he mentioned he'd be returning next week. That news traveled fast, and it reached someone he used to know. His ex-wife Maria took a sip of her wine. She looked like she didn't have a care in the world. But hearing his name seemed to trigger a memory. A time when he was trying to impress her with a simple night view, back when he had nothing. The memory faded. Back in the present, Kim Shin waited at a red light. The Ferrari sat there, its engine humming quietly. The light turned yellow, and the engine roared to life. The second it turned green, he was gone. Kim Shin pushed the car, feeling its power. In the passenger seat, his colleague Jongyop was having the time of his life. He was so happy he felt like he could die right there. He joked that if Kim Shin died, he'd die too. He thanked him over and over for the ride, saying the engine sound was like a religious experience. Then he got serious and said he had something to ask. Kim Shin just looked at him, a little surprised by the question. Jongyop got straight to the point. He asked what Kim Shin thought of their colleague Jo Sua. Kim Shin chuckled, telling his friend he was being way too direct. But Jongyop just grinned, saying this was the fun part of commuting together. Kim Shin took a moment to think about his answer. He said she was kind, capable, and took great care of others. Basically, she was a junior colleague he was really grateful for. Jongyop was clearly hoping for something more. He asked if that was it, and when Kim Shin said yes, the guy let out a huge sigh. Kim Shin warned him that one more sigh like that, and he was taking the car keys. Jongyop immediately apologized and promised to drive in mute mode. With that settled, they continued their drive. A little while later, Kim Shin pulled up to a sleek, modern building. As soon as he got to work, his colleagues swarmed him. They couldn't believe the rumors were true and demanded to know if the Ferrari outside was really his. One of them pointed out that driving a car like that would obviously get people talking. The legend of his crypto success was real, and they wanted to know how he'd made such an insane return on his investment. Kim Shin just calmly explained his strategy. He said he simply reinvested everything he earned and put it all back in. That answer just made them feel worse. The poor guys were practically in tears, complaining about how they'd lost everything. Kim Sang-gi was down 40% and An Myung-guk was down 30%. Their emergency funds were completely wiped out. So Kim Sang-gi grabbed Kim Shin's hands like his life depended on it. He begged him for a lifelong favor to share some of his investment secrets. He looked absolutely desperate, convinced that Kim Shin had some kind of special foresight. An Myung-guk joined in, pleading for just a little advice. Honestly, the pressure was starting to get to him. He looked at their desperate, hopeful faces. The thing is, he didn't have some secret strategy. All he did was hold on through the chaos. He had no idea what he could possibly tell them. He had to say something, so he just blurted out the first thing that came to his mind. Told them the secret was having the heart of a beast. The two of them just stared back, completely confused. They had no idea what that was supposed to mean. Kim Shin immediately regretted it. He just panicked and said something ridiculous. He could see them trying to figure it out, guessing that maybe he just meant having insides. He decided to just come clean and tell them the truth. But before he could say anything, one of his colleagues interrupted him, saying he completely understood. Kim Shin was completely caught off guard. Turns out this guy had completely misinterpreted it in the best way possible. He thought Kim Shin meant that before any strategy, what really mattered was having the right mindset. Somehow, his nonsense advice had turned into a deep lesson. With that settled, Kim Sang-gi asked if he was investing in any other coins besides Bitcoin. Kim Shin confirmed that he'd split his money between two others. He explained that after buying the house and the car, he put the rest of his money right back into crypto. He was betting that the market still had a long way to go up. Back in the present, he agreed to tell them which coins he bought. But he made one thing crystal clear: whatever they chose to do with the information was their own responsibility. They quickly agreed. With that settled, he told them he'd put his money into two specific coins, XBR and Ethereum. The guys seemed confused, asking why he'd picked those newer coins. Kim Shin explained that unlike the others, these two had very clear goals. He laid it out for them. XBR was designed to help with international bank transfers. Ethereum, on the other hand, used blockchain to handle all sorts of different transactions. He admitted that it didn't guarantee a price increase, but it made them much more likely to get attention from investors and the media. His colleagues were floored. They realized he'd seriously done his homework. Our boy just smiled and said, of course he studied. After all, his entire fortune was on the line, and that fortune just happened to be in the billions. Meanwhile, back at the office, one of the women was getting ready in the bathroom. She could already tell it was going to be a busy morning. One of the women, Dion, overheard two of her colleagues talking. And of course, they were talking about Assistant Kim. The news was spreading like wildfire. One of them couldn't believe it, asking if Kim Shin had always been that rich. The other woman just smirked. She said the news was already all over the company, but there was more to the story. Turns out the new rumor was that he'd bought the car entirely on debt. Her friend jumped right in, calling him a car poor. She even added that she'd heard he was into gambling and drinking. Just unbelievable. Dion couldn't believe what she was hearing. But these two just kept going, saying that the quiet ones are always the worst. As they were about to continue, Dion finally turned around. She'd heard enough. She politely excused herself for interrupting. The look on their faces was priceless. They were completely busted. Dion looked them dead in the eyes and asked a simple question. Who told them that? Just then, the sound of heels echoed through the office. Someone new had arrived. One of the guys in the office just froze, completely stunned. She walked up to one of the senior desks and introduced herself as being from the support department. She was looking for Assistant Kim. The man, team leader On, apologized and explained that Kim Shin was out on an external call for the day. He got up from his chair and politely offered to pass along any message she had for him. But before she could answer, another employee carrying a huge stack of boxes called out for team leader On, asking where to put some conference papers. The poor guy just looked completely overwhelmed. He had no idea what to deal with first. Just then, someone stepped in to help. It was Kim Shin. He just walked up and took the entire stack of boxes from the struggling employee. The poor guy looked incredibly relieved and thanked him. The woman from the support department just stared. She warned him to be careful with that big stack. He looked over at her and she smiled, saying it had been a while. That's when he finally recognized her. It was Han Ki-won. Seeing Han Ki-won again must have triggered something because suddenly he was lost in a memory. A really bad one. It was his honeymoon and his ex-wife's voice cut through the air, complaining about the hotel he'd booked. She started tearing into him immediately. Back then, Kim Shin just tried to explain himself. He told her it was a popular spot for honeymoons and that he'd been careful. He even apologized for it. But she just told him to stop making excuses. She kept going, asking if anyone ever taught him to apologize first instead of making excuses. She accused him of trying to make her look like the bad guy, told him to grow up, and that he couldn't do anything without her. It was a non-stop attack designed to break him down. She finished by mocking him, saying he was so pathetic he never would have gotten married if it wasn't for her. And just like that, the memory was over. He was back in the office. Han Ki-won was standing there, arms crossed, addressing someone as assistant manager Kim. He just stared at her, still reeling from that terrible memory. She held out a file, asking assistant manager Kim to check over some documents for her. But Kim Shin was barely listening. The memory, her voice, it was too much. His hands went weak and the entire stack of boxes crashed to the floor. The loud noise made everyone in the office turn around. Han Ki-won immediately put a hand on his back. The whole office just stopped and stared, but her touch wasn't comforting at all. And the look in her eye, it was cold, almost like she was disappointed in him. Kim Shin just took the documents, trying to keep things professional. With the documents exchanged, she turned to leave without another word. The second he was gone, her expression turned to pure disgust. She stomped away, fuming. She couldn't stand it. This woman was furious that the man who used to cower before her was now acting so confident. The real reason for her anger was the Ferrari. She was kicking herself, realizing if she'd just waited one more year, all that money would have been hers. She decided she couldn't change the past. She walked into her office as her co-workers looked up, but she could still shape the future. If she couldn't have his money, she would just have to crush him completely. When Han Ki-won got back, her friends immediately gathered around her. They could tell something was wrong and asked if assistant manager Kim had said something to upset her. With tears in her eyes, she explained that he had suddenly snapped at her. He told her to keep her work and personal life separate, even though she hadn't said anything personal at all. Her friends tried to comfort her, saying they didn't think Kim Shin was that kind of person. From her desk, another colleague quietly watched the whole thing. She just sat there taking it all in without saying a word. Meanwhile, Kim Shin was back at his own desk, typing away as if nothing had happened. But he wasn't just working. He was thinking about Han Ki-won, acknowledging that she had come back. He'd always wondered how he would feel if they met again. To his surprise, he didn't feel much of anything. He finally understood what people meant. After a breakup, you really do become worse than strangers. Just then, one of his colleagues, Kim Sang-gi, leaned in close. He whispered that he needed to talk to Shin for a minute, telling him to meet on the roof. When Shin got to the roof, Sang-gi immediately grabbed him in a huge hug, congratulating him. Shin had no idea what was going on. Turns out a bunch of their co-workers were up there too. They were all clapping and cheering for him, calling him amazing. Sang-gi grabbed him looking totally hyped. He asked if Shin seriously hadn't checked the prices yet. He explained that XBR, the crypto they invested in, had jumped a whole 70% in just 2 days. 70%? The number hit Shin like a ton of bricks. He started doing the math in his head. His XBR was already worth $58 million that morning. A 70% jump on that was just insane. His XBR holdings alone had just shot up by nearly 100 billion won. He'd hit the jackpot all over again. And it wasn't just him. The colleagues who took his advice were celebrating too. One guy was screaming with joy, saying he'd made a whole year's salary. Another one was literally dancing, happy that he'd doubled his profit. Sang-gi felt a little bad and apologized for telling everyone without asking first. But Shin just played it cool, saying it wasn't a big secret anyway. His friend got real curious then. He leaned in close and asked Shin to be honest about how much he really put into XBR, guessing it was at least 300 million. Shin hesitated. He didn't want to lie, but the real number was just insane. He finally admitted it, 10 billion won in XBR and another 10 billion in Ethereum. The guy's jaw hit the floor. He quickly did the math and realized that with a 70% jump, Shin had just made at least 7 billion won in 2 days. Panicking a little, Sang-gi asked if they should sell right away. But Shin was firm, reminding him that every investment is your own responsibility. As he walked away, Shin thought about the situation. XBR was made for stable bank transfers. These wild price swings were a clear sign that pure greed had completely taken over the market. He knew he could sell right now and walk away with a fortune, but something told him to wait. 2 days of huge jumps like this could mean something even bigger was coming. So he told his friend he wasn't selling yet. Sengi asked if that was being greedy. Shin just replied that since everyone else was being greedy, he'd ride the wave too. And with that, the news spread like wildfire. Kim Shin had hit the jackpot again. The story of a young guy striking it rich was just too good to ignore. Soon, everyone in the company was talking about Kim Shin. And of course, with all that attention, the rumors started flying. A few guys were talking by the bathroom. One of them claimed assistant manager Kim made over $1 billion from crypto. His buddy immediately corrected him, saying he heard Shin was worth more than $4 billion now. They even heard that some of his teammates got rich thanks to his tips. But then, the conversation took a darker turn, with one of them mentioning that some nasty gossip was going around. One of the guys immediately jumped to his defense, saying that didn't sound like the Kim Shin he knew. The gossiper quickly backed down, admitting he just heard it from somebody else. Just then, a woman holding a coffee stepped up. She told the guy to be careful what he says, warning him that someone was probably spreading lies just to tear Shin down. She was clearly furious about the whole thing. The guy spreading the rumors was so startled, he dropped his coffee. His friends just stared, completely stunned. The coffee went everywhere. Meanwhile, at a cafe nearby, Kim Shin was just walking by. Inside, a woman was sitting alone at a table, waiting for someone. A couple of guys at another table couldn't help but stare. They thought she was gorgeous, maybe a model or an actress. But even they could tell she looked a little sad. Just then, someone called out her name. It was the person she was waiting for, apologizing for being late. It was Kim Shin. He walked over with a smile, holding a tray with their drinks. She told him it was fine, she'd just gotten there. Kim Shin put the drinks down and insisted the coffee was on him. Jo Sua cut right to the chase. She wanted to know why he'd called her here to talk about Kim Shin. The man seemed to like her direct approach. He took a sip of his drink and said he wanted to ask her something first. He asked her what she thought about the rumors going around, the ones about Kim Shin being a gambling addict who hurt his ex-wife. Jo Sua didn't even hesitate. She shot up from her seat, furious, insisting that it was all lies. She was certain someone was just spreading malicious gossip. Her answer seemed to be exactly what he was looking for. He told her he was satisfied but had one more question. He looked her right in the eyes and asked her point blank, did she like Kim Shin? She was completely silent. And then her eyes went wide. The question had hit its mark. The poor girl completely short-circuited. She started stammering, trying to deny it, but her brain was just spinning in circles. Her friend just smiled, completely unfazed. He told her there was no need to hide it. He already knew and he was just trying to help her out. He put his drink down on the table, his expression turning serious. Then he gave her a direct command. He told her to go find Kim Shin right now and confess her feelings to him. The next day at work, a colleague suddenly ran up and gave Kim Shin a massive hug. Our boy was completely caught off guard, feeling a strange sense of déjà vu. It wasn't just one guy. A whole crowd of people had gathered around, all clapping and cheering for him. His friend leaned in and whispered the reason. All these people were the ones who hit it big with crypto, and it was all thanks to him. The stories started pouring out. One guy happily announced he was getting a new car. Another had enough for deposit on a new lease. They were all ecstatic. Kim Shin was stunned. He hadn't realized so many people had followed his lead. After word spread about his own success, most of the employees had jumped into the market. And it was the right move. The coin he recommended, XBR, shot up in value. Every single person who believed in him struck gold. They started calling him their lucky charm, thanking him over and over. He just smiled awkwardly and said he was glad it worked out for them. That's when Sengi put him on the spot. He remembered Kim Shin investing about $1 billion and asked if that meant he'd made close to $10 billion. Kim Shin just laughed it off, trying to downplay it. He was sweating bullets. The truth is, his friend's guess wasn't even close. He tried to tell them it wasn't quite that much, but he was sweating too hard to be convincing. The real number was 578 billion won. It was a ridiculous amount of money, enough to buy an entire company if he felt like it. And it was all because he'd made the right calls. He predicted XBR and Ethereum would go up, so he invested, hoping they'd grow nicely over time. And at first they did. The little sprout started to grow just like he expected. He was happy with the progress, thinking the sprouts were growing fast. But then they just kept growing. He never imagined they would skyrocket this insanely in just 1 month. He thought some people might notice his success, but this was happening way too fast. He was starting to get worried. All this new attention was making him really uncomfortable. Suddenly, his coworkers were all over him, begging him to teach them about crypto. They'd heard the rumors that he was some kind of expert. He tried to wave them off, explaining that it was a really bad time to invest, but they weren't listening. He gave them some solid advice. When something shoots up that fast, it's guaranteed to fall just as hard. But instead of taking the warning, they were even more impressed with how much he knew. They started asking what else was good to invest in, pleading for any tips he could give them. But not everyone was happy for him. His ex-wife was nearby, listening to all of it, and she was absolutely furious. She couldn't stand hearing his name. All she could think was that he was dirt poor when they were married, and now he was successful without her. In a fit of rage, she kicked a trash can as hard as she could. She was furious. It was clear she was about to do something that would kill her pride. But she was desperate. She decided she had no other choice. Meanwhile, Kim Shin was looking at his phone. The company group chat was going crazy. It seemed like everyone was talking about crypto now, celebrating all the money they were making. He was just glad that at least no one had lost any money yet. That's when a new message popped up from an unsaved number. He opened it and his eyes went wide. He couldn't believe who it was from. It was his ex-wife Han Ki-won. She was just casually asking him how he was doing. Then she sent another message, pretending to be concerned and saying she knew he must have struggled after she left. He just stared at the screen, thinking about how he'd actually been happier than ever. The next message was a classic move. She said she felt like she hadn't been understanding enough. She kept going, trying to use his past against him and acting like she was just too harsh. Then she suggested they meet up. Kim Shin just stared at the screen, completely unimpressed by the act. She said she'd be waiting, but our boy wasn't having any of it. He hovered his finger over the button to leave the chat for good. He decided to just block her, but right then his phone started ringing. It was Jo Sua. He answered and she sounded surprised he picked up so fast. He just told her he happened to be looking at his phone. She asked why he was calling at this hour, then quickly backtracked, saying it was nothing serious and she just wanted to check in. She asked if he was busy, looking a little nervous as she sat on her bed. He told her not at all, explaining that it was only 8 o'clock. He was just at home doing some laundry. Jo Sua asked him if he was resting well. He told her he'd just finished working out and asked what she was doing for the holiday tomorrow. Kim Shin told her he was thinking of going to the department store. He explained that he'd thrown out most of his old furniture when he moved. He hesitated for a moment, then worked up the courage to ask if she could come along too. Kim Shin was a little surprised. He clearly wasn't expecting that. Then he told her he didn't see why not. He suggested they meet in front of the store around 4. Her face completely lit up as she excitedly agreed and said goodnight. The second the call ended, she completely lost it, flopping onto her bed and kicking her feet in the air. She got the date. She clutched her pillow, replaying the conversation in her head. She was just hoping her voice didn't shake too much when she asked him out. Friend's words from earlier were still ringing in her ears. He had told her to go find Kim Shin right away and just tell him how she felt. The thought was so stressful it felt like a nightmare. She shot up in bed, imagining her friend yelling at her to just get it over with. She sat there completely flustered. A real confession, the idea was terrifying. But she tried to steel herself. She wasn't sure if she could actually do it, but she promised herself she'd at least try her best tomorrow. The next day, the sun was shining down on the department store, where they'd agreed to meet. Kim Shin showed up a little early. He was wondering if he should wait in a cafe when he heard someone call his name. It was Jo Sua. She looked really happy to see him and asked if he'd been waiting long. Kim Shin told her he just got there. She then asked if it was okay to call him Appa since they were outside of work. Kim Shin got a little flustered but told her it was fine. He suggested they head inside to get out of the cold. She glanced up at him for a second. Even though it was cold outside, Kim Shin was starting to feel the heat. This was clearly making him nervous. She was blushing a little too. The tension was definitely building between them. They walked towards the entrance, and he asked her what she wanted to see first. As they walked into the store, a sales associate welcomed them. It suddenly dawned on Sua that this was the first time they'd ever met up alone outside of the office. The thoughts started to form in her mind. Her imagination ran wild, picturing them shopping for dishes, eating cake. That's when the question hit her full force. Was this actually a date? She was so nervous she could feel a bead of sweat forming. But before she could get lost in her thoughts, Kim Shin excitedly called out to her, telling her to come look at something. He was completely captivated by a duvet, exclaiming how fluffy it was. Sua just watched, a little confused. She never figured him for someone who got this excited about shopping. She smiled, agreeing with him that it looked incredibly soft. That's when he explained why it meant so much. Back when he lived in a semi-basement, all he could afford were thick, heavy blankets. He never knew something could be so light and cozy. Without even thinking about it, he told the salesperson he'd take 3 sets. Sua just watched as he handed over his card. But he wasn't done. A moment later, his eyes landed on something else, and he was just as excited. It was a brand new cordless vacuum that looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. So it could only stand by as he bought that too. Then it was a fridge with a giant display screen, costing over 5 million won. Then a washer and dryer set. Then a reclining sofa. He was basically furnishing his entire apartment in one trip. He was having the time of his life. In just a short time, he'd spent over 56 million won. He looked at their reflection and had a thought. Shopping was way more fun when you had money. To him, that massive bill barely even made a dent. To Kim Shin, this whole experience felt like turning on a cheat code in an old video game. Everything was suddenly easy. He turned to Sua, worried that she was getting bored just watching him shop. But she quickly smiled and told him she was having fun too. She tried to believe it herself, but her mind was racing. Her friend's words kept ringing in her ears, telling her to just confess already. She knew he was right. She couldn't keep hesitating forever. She took a deep breath, ready to finally say something. She decided today was the day. But just as she called out his name, he started to speak at the exact same time. The sudden interruption left them both completely frozen and flustered. They both tried to recover. He told her to go first, but she just waved it off, insisting it wasn't anything important. Since she was too shy to speak, Kim Shin decided to go first. He took a breath, ready to say what was on his mind. He started to explain something to her, something he felt was important. She listened closely, hanging on his every word. But whatever he said, it wasn't what she was expecting at all. Her eyes went wide in complete surprise. She just stood there, completely stunned and trying to form a response. But somewhere else, as the evening went on, someone was waiting for him. And they were getting really, really angry. A fist slammed down on the table as they called out his name. Turns out it was his ex-wife. She was sitting alone at a fancy restaurant, absolutely furious, and demanded to know how he dared to stand her up. Back at the office, the crypto craze was in full swing. One of the managers was screaming at the top of his lungs, predicting that XBR was about to hit 10,001. He wasn't the only one. The whole room was electric, with everyone pumping their fists and cheering for the market to keep climbing. Kim Shin just watched from the side as his co-workers talked about it. It seemed like the entire company was trading crypto now. One of them pointed out the manager who was yelling the loudest, a guy named Na Sanguk. Hilariously, this was the same guy who used to call crypto gambling for idiots. But it looked like a taste of profit was all it took to change his mind. And the profits were insane. In just 2 months, Ethereum had tripled and XBR had gone up tenfold. Compared to where it started, that was over a 1,300% gain. Returns like that could turn anyone into a fanatic. Greed was pulling everyone in. Everyone believes they'll be the one to win, so they all surrender to that greed. But the truth is, no one really knows what's going to happen. That moment you win feels amazing, but it's also the moment you get hooked. Kim Shin knew what happened when the greed turned sour. It starts when the prices begin to fall, when your own money starts to disappear. The moment you start taking losses, that's when the real panic sets in. For the little guys who get caught, that's when hell opens up. And that rule applied to everyone, even him. The memory of his father's words came flooding back. His dad had warned him that our gambling table, just winning a hand isn't the same as actually making money. A young Kim Shin didn't understand, so he asked what he meant. His father just grinned, showing a missing tooth. He explained that you've only really won once you get up from the table and walk away with the cash. That was the lesson Kim Shin was holding on to now. Meanwhile, in the office group chat, everyone was celebrating. They were all thanking Kim Shin for his advice on a new crypto, which was making them a ton of money. But of course, not everyone was happy. One of his colleagues just scoffed, thinking they were all idiots. He was convinced Kim Shin just got lucky. Like him, completely focused on the rising and falling prices. Genius over here was already counting his money. He bragged to himself that he'd made 100 million in a month and was already planning for the tens of billions he was sure were coming. He started daydreaming about the life he was going to have. A huge place with a river view, a couple of fancy sports cars, and finally marrying a beautiful woman like Sua. That was the ultimate prize in his mind. Back in the real world, a notification sound snapped him out of it. He was still just a guy in a dark room staring at a screen. Kim Shin decided to give his team a heads up. He sent a message to the office group chat saying he had an announcement. Immediately, everyone got excited, praising him and ready to hear his next big tip. The jealous colleague, still staring at his monitors, got the notification. He saw Kim Shin's message pop up and figured he was about to drop another piece of secret info. But that's not what happened. Kim Shin announced that he was selling all of his crypto holdings. The chat immediately filled with confused messages from people who had just started investing on his advice. This clown just scoffed. He thought Kim Shin had to be out of his mind to sell when things were going so well. The chat was a mess, some were panicking, but one guy trusted Kim Shin completely and said he'd sell too. Genius over here was convinced he knew better. He thought to himself that people shouldn't just blindly follow Kim Shin's advice. Selling during a massive upswing was just plain stupid, in his opinion. He sat there completely sure of himself. He decided Kim Shin was just an amateur who didn't even understand the basics of investing. Meanwhile, Kim Shin typed out one last message. He explained that he believed the price spike was just caused by greed, not actual value. He made it clear he wasn't trying to change anyone's mind. It was their money, their responsibility. And with that, he put his phone down. He'd given his warning. What happened next was up to them. With the crypto situation handled, Kim Shin's mind was already on his next task. He had a meeting with team leader on the next day. The next day, he headed into the office. He walked with purpose through the hallways, on his way to see team leader An Myunguk. The team leader looked up from his desk, a little surprised to see Kim Shin standing there. Kim Shin stood before his boss and asked if he had a moment to talk. He explained that there was something important he needed to discuss. The team leader immediately agreed, suggesting they head up to the rooftop for some privacy. But the moment they got up there, team leader An suddenly grabbed him by the shoulder. Turns out he was just incredibly excited. He started shouting congratulations, thanking Kim Shin for making him so rich. He laughed, saying he now had enough money for a lifetime of drinks. Kim Shin just winced, telling his boss he was kind of hurting him. Once the excitement died down, the mood became serious again. The team leader finally asked what was on his mind. Kim Shin stood there for a second, holding a white envelope. He tried to play it off, saying it was nothing much, but the letter in his hands told a different story. The team leader eyed the envelope. He was sure he knew what was coming. But it wasn't a resignation letter. Kim Shin handed him the form and asked if he could take a 2-week vacation. The team leader was stunned. He blurted out, asking if Kim Shin was really asking for vacation and not quitting his job. He couldn't wrap his head around it. He told Kim Shin that after making all that money, he just figured quitting was the obvious next step. Kim Shin admitted he'd considered it but said he wasn't ready for that yet. He explained that he was actually planning to go to the U.S. for his vacation. Turns out he'd been thinking a lot about his future. He explained to a friend that he'd tried to figure out what to do with the money, but nothing came to mind. All he'd ever known was part-time jobs and office work. It's when it hit him. He realized just how little experience and knowledge he actually had about the world. So he decided to use this chance to study a bit and broaden his perspective by going to the States. His friend listened to his whole story. She seemed to understand exactly what he was going through. She just smiled, telling him it was nothing to worry about and wished him a safe trip. Back with team leader On, the vacation request was officially approved. The team leader wished him a good trip, and Kim Shin thanked him. But just as they were about to part ways, Kim Shin stopped him. He asked his boss if he thought it was really okay for him to keep living the way he was. The team leader didn't get it. Kim Shin explained that sure, he'd made a lot of money, but he had no idea what he was supposed to do now. He confessed that he didn't have any hobbies or dreams like other people, and no real talents either. He was genuinely wondering if it was okay to just chase money without any real goal in life. Staring out at the city, he admitted that he'd always been jealous of people who had dreams. People who could dedicate their whole lives to something like singing. He felt like everyone else had something they were passionate about: singing, sports, painting. They all had these big passions that he just never had. Team leader On listened carefully. He admitted that maybe it was because he was just a jaded old office worker, but he had a different take on the whole dream thing. He told Kim Shin that he thought the whole idea of chasing dreams was complete bullshit. Kim Shin was completely taken aback. To explain himself, the team leader offered to tell his own story. He explained that when he was a kid, his dream was to be a professional golf player. His parents loved the sport too, so they supported him completely. From the age of 10, he trained relentlessly to go pro. His hands were a mess, blistered, bruised, and the calluses were always peeling off. But he said that whenever he held a golf club, all that pain just disappeared like magic. Kim Shin asked if having that dream made him happy back then. The team leader smiled a little, remembering. He admitted that yes, it absolutely did. But that happiness lasted only until he learned the truth. He found out that the lessons and fees were costing his family a fortune. It was slowly breaking them financially. So he had to give up on golf. And that's how he ended up as an office worker, just like Kim Shin. He then asked Kim Shin if he knew what his dream was now. It was simple: to sit with his family at a baseball game with no worries at all. The words hit Kim Shin hard. The team leader told him that dreams are nice, but he shouldn't get obsessed with the idea. Life is long, with plenty of time to find things he wants to do. He advised him not to waste time worrying. Just try things, enjoy them. Everything he does will build him into the person he's meant to be. Finished by thanking Kim Shin for listening to an old man ramble. But Kim Shin was grateful. The advice had really helped. Kim Shin felt a sense of peace. He decided he'd just take things one step at a time. He cleared his throat, ready to change the subject. The team leader leaned in, a curious look on his face. He told Kim Shin there was something he was dying to know. He got right to the point. Just how much money had Kim Shin made? He promised he wouldn't tell a soul. Kim Shin didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked the team leader how much an apartment in Gangnam costs these days, guessing it was around 1.5 to 2 billion won. He paused for a moment, doing some quick math in his head using the 2 billion figure as a baseline. Then he leaned in and whispered the final number right into the team leader's ear. The team leader's brain just about short-circuited. The number was so big he couldn't even process it. He stammered, barely able to ask if Kim Shin really had that much cash. The poor guy was so flustered he just said he had to go and walked off, leaving Kim Shin alone on the roof. The team leader just started laughing. It wasn't a normal laugh, more like his brain had just short-circuited. He stared at Kim Shin, still trying to process it, and told him he was now a ridiculously wealthy man. And he wasn't exaggerating. Kim Shin's current assets were on a completely different level. The team leader was still trying to wrap his head around it. The amount of money Kim Shin had was enough to buy 1,000 apartments in Gangnam. The moment he stepped onto the plane, the flight attendants greeted him with a deep bow. He realized it had been a long time since he'd definitely flown nice. This was a whole different world from what he was used to. Remembered his last flight in economy. It was cramped, uncomfortable, and just plain miserable. This trip was going to be different. He leaned back in his seat, a satisfied smile on his face. He couldn't get over just how comfortable first class was. This was a whole new level of living. That's when he heard the woman next to him on the phone. She was talking about car designs, saying the new look would appeal to younger buyers. She seemed completely absorbed in her work, even as the plane was getting ready to leave. She kept talking, handling whatever issue had come up. Kim Shin noticed her and gave a small wave, letting her know it was fine. She quickly wrapped up the call, telling the person on the other end to just send an email if it was urgent. After hanging up, she turned to Kim Shin and apologized for the urgent work call. He just smiled and told her not to worry about it, since work is unavoidable. She then suggested that since they were going to be stuck together for the next 11 hours, they might as well introduce themselves. She handed him a business card. Turns out her name was Jin Yoo-jeong, and she was an executive director at Murray Motors. She definitely looked the part too, calm and confident. Kim Shin looked at the card. An executive director at her age meant she was either a genius or from a super rich family. He admitted he didn't have a business card and introduced himself as just an assistant manager at a drug company. Her expression immediately changed. She was clearly confused about how a regular employee could be sitting in first class. Her boy just smiled and explained that these days, he mostly focuses on investments. A moment later, the flight attendant brought out his meal. It was a perfectly cooked steak, glistening under the cabin lights. Her boy was practically drooling. He'd never seen anything like it, especially not on a plane. He picked up his knife and fork and sliced into it. The inside was a perfect red. Without wasting another second, he took his first bite. The flavor was so intense it was like a lightning bolt hit his brain. He couldn't believe it. The steak was juicy, chewy, and the sauce cut through the taste perfectly. He took a sip of wine to go with it. To think he was having a meal like this on a plane. This was what first class was all about. It was so good, he found himself wondering if he could get a refill. The executive Jin Yujong watched him from her seat. She could tell this was his first time flying like this, but something didn't add up. There was no way a normal employee could afford a first-class ticket. Our boy was completely oblivious, just focused on his amazing meal. But she kept staring, her eyes fixed on him. Suddenly, she spoke up, complimenting his posture. She told him the way he held his knife and fork was flawless and looked completely natural. She explained that she just thought he looked really sharp, and apologized if she'd caught him off guard. Kim Shin was a little surprised by the comment, but he just smiled and told her it was fine. The conversation paused, and she just looked at him thoughtfully. And that's when it clicked. He suddenly remembered where he'd seen her before, in an ad for Murray Motors, the same car company he'd driven on Jeju Island. She showed him a concept for new car ad on her tablet. The plan was to target both the Korean and American markets with this new model. Then she got curious and asked him what kind of car he drives. She said it was fine if it wasn't one of hers, she just wanted to get a sense of his taste. So he told her a Ferrari. Her smile tightened just a little. That was definitely not the answer she was expecting from a regular office worker. She recovered quickly, mentioning that her company was also developing sporty models and electric cars. That's when a light bulb went off for Kim Shin. He told her he'd actually driven one of their electric cars on Jeju Island. Her eyes lit up immediately. She leaned in, desperate to hear what he thought of it. But he didn't hold back. He said the accelerator and the brake just felt clunky and unnatural. Her professional smile completely cracked. He wasn't finished. He added that the battery drained way too fast and the ride itself was pretty uncomfortable. The poor woman just looked down, completely dejected. As she took it all in, Kim Shin had a quiet thought. The old him never would have been this honest. He really had changed. When the plane finally landed, the executive from Murray Motors wished him a good trip and offered a handshake. He shook her hand and returned the pleasantries, but honestly he was just thinking one thing. He was finally free. Man, that flight was exhausting. Turns out she talked his ear off for hours. He made a mental note to keep to himself on the next flight. He finally made it through customs and pushed open the exit doors. The second he stepped outside, the city just hit him. Yellow cabs, skyscrapers. It was a whole different world. His eyes went wide. He was just completely blown away. He watched people rushing around trying to hail cabs. It finally hit him. He was really, truly in America. He'd barely taken it all in when he heard someone shouting his name. A man with a big smile and an even bigger belly was rushing towards him, welcoming him to America. It was his old friend Myung-woo. Kim Shin couldn't help but tease him about gaining some weight, but his friend just laughed it off, saying it was nothing for America. This was his closest friend. They'd lived together in a tiny basement apartment during their tough college years. Through sheer hard work, Myung-woo landed a job at a world-class company and moved to the States. He'd insisted that Kim Shin stay at his house for the trip. Still looking at him now, Kim Shin thought his friend had changed, maybe a little too much. Myung-woo was already talking about food. When Kim Shin asked if he'd made a reservation somewhere, his friend just laughed, saying the first thing you eat in America has to be a hamburger. But back in Korea, the mood was a lot less friendly. A fork stabbed violently into a cherry tomato. It was Han Ki-won, his ex-wife. This woman was absolutely seething, furious that Kim Shin had ignored her calls and dared to go on vacation without her. This woman was absolutely furious that after she swallowed her pride to contact him, he just blew her off. One of her colleagues noticed her mood and asked if something was wrong. Ki-won put on an act, saying she was just reminded of her ex-husband. That's when she started spreading lies. She told everyone she heard he was in America but wondered how a gambler could afford it. She claimed he probably took out a loan on his car and blew all his crypto money. Then she really laid it on thick, calling him abusive and the worst of the worst. But someone cut her off. It was team leader Choi. She calmly told Ki-won that she didn't take her for the type of person to speak badly about others behind their back. She said that if they broke up, that should be the end of it. The team leader just stared, making it clear she wasn't impressed with the drama. Ki-won tried to make excuses, but team leader Choi cut her off again, telling her it was a problem for the two of them to sort out themselves. Then she went even further. She defended Kim Shin, saying he had a great reputation at the company for being a hard worker. She said he'd never even gotten angry at anyone, let alone caused trouble. The person Ki-won was describing sounded nothing like the man they all knew. But team leader Choi wasn't done. She flat out asked why Ki-won was so obsessed with bad-mouthing Kim Shin. Then she just said it. She told Ki-won it really just looked like she was jealous. She stared her down, challenging her to say she was wrong. And Ki-won had nothing. She was sweating, completely caught. She finally managed to stammer that the team leader was going too far. Then she put on a big show, acting all hurt and asking how Choi could be so mean before storming out of the room. Team leader Choi just watched her go and let out a sigh. She clearly wasn't buying the act for a second. The second Ki-won was alone in the bathroom, her true colors came out. She was absolutely furious, calling the team leader a bitch under her breath. She was so furious she just started kicking the stall doors, ranting to herself about how the team leader was just a nobody acting all important. She decided that if everyone was going to look down on her, she would see this through to the very end. So sitting there in the stall, she pulled out her phone. On the screen was the price of a crypto called XBeeply. It had gone up a lot. The value was over 146 million won. A nasty smile spread across her face. This woman was sure she'd be the one laughing in the end. Meanwhile, back at the office, the crypto craze was in full swing. One of the guys was showing off his phone, bragging about how he made a huge profit just by waiting one extra day to sell. He started giving advice like he was some kind of expert, saying you had to nail the timing. He even threw a little shade at assistant manager Kim, calling him impulsive. This clown then tried to pressure everyone into buying XP, claiming it was at its lowest price ever. He told them if they were too scared to buy now, they'd regret it forever. He told them to just trust him and follow his lead, promising the coin would shoot up to the moon. The other guys listening just looked annoyed, thinking he talked as if he was personally making the price rise. One of them turned to team leader On and asked what he planned to do. On admitted he'd been on the fence ever since assistant manager Kim sold his own shares. He explained that at first he was confident he could sell anytime, but as the profits kept growing, he started losing his nerve. The poor guy confessed that all day long he just thinks about crypto. He's constantly wondering if he should have invested more or if he should put more money in now. He couldn't get the charts out of his head, so he sold it all. The guy who was just giving everyone advice nearly choked on his drink. The so-called expert couldn't believe it, yelling about how On just sold a total cash cow. But team leader On just calmly said he did it because he trusted assistant manager Kim. That shut him up completely. Team leader On looked at him, a little sweat on his brow, but his eyes were sharp. He explained that anyone can get lucky and pick a winning coin, but knowing when to sell something that's still going up, that's pure skill. So when assistant manager Kim said he was selling everything, On was certain he knew he was watching a true master at work. Meanwhile, far from all the office drama, a waitress in America was serving up some burgers. Kim Shin took a bite and was genuinely surprised. The burger was amazing. His friend Khan just laughed, telling him not to worry about money while he was visiting. He just kept eating, happy to be catching up. Kim Shin smiled, thanking him for looking out for him. He said a true friend is always there when you need them. The two of them just sat there enjoying their food. That's when two other people walked up to their table. The woman smiled, saying she knew they'd find him here. Kim Shin looked completely lost. Turns out his friend goes by the name Khan in the States just because he thinks it sounds cool. Kim Shin asked who they were, and Khan introduced them as his American friends, Chris and Helena. The woman Helena immediately started praising Khan's work. She said the control model he tweaked for them was perfect. This was clearly more than just a friendly visit. The guy Chris chimed in, telling Khan he needed him to do a good job on his project too. He joked that Khan's initial design was so good it made everything else easy. Kim Shin had no idea what they were talking about. Khan explained that Chris runs a startup that develops self-driving car software. Chris introduced himself as the founder of a company called Aurora, explaining they were building an autonomous driving system for passenger cars. Then the woman Helena introduced herself. Turns out she also runs a startup, one that develops eco-friendly materials for clothes and shoes. Kim Shin was impressed. He asked if it was hard to manage a startup in the early stages. Chris admitted that of course it's tough, but he said it's also incredibly rewarding. He described it like pushing through a terrible storm. He talked about fighting through every single problem just to bring an idea to life. That moment when all the hard work finally pays off. And you finally reach the top. You get to see what you've been working for. That feeling, he said, makes it all worth it. Chris said that feeling of success makes all the suffering worth it. Kim Shin was clearly impressed, telling him it was amazing. Kim Shin said he truly respected their drive. But he also added that no matter how good an idea is, it could never become real without a talented person like Khan. Alina jumped in, explaining that Silicon Valley is full of ideas, but ideas alone are useless. She said Khan's programming skills are what bring those ideas to life, making him the kind of talent every company dreams of having. She then joked that his only real flaw was his habit of eating hamburgers all the time. Chris chimed in, teasing Khan that it was true he'd gained weight because of them. Listening to them all, Kim Shin felt a sense of gratitude. He thought to himself that meeting people like this right after arriving in America meant the trip had already paid for itself. Later that night, the city was quiet. After dinner, Charlie took Kim Shin back to his place. Kim Shin was impressed by how clean it was, but he was floored by the rent. Over $3,000 a month, that was almost 4 million won. Charlie just explained that prices in America were steep, and San Francisco was on a whole other level. Then he grabbed a couple of beers from the fridge. Kim Shin was a little confused. They had just eaten. Charlie said it was just a palate cleanser. But really, he was curious about what his friend had been up to. He teased him, saying a penny pincher like Kim Shin wouldn't have come all the way to America without a very good reason. Kim Shin just smiled. He knew his friend was right. And he also knew one beer wasn't going to be nearly enough for this story. And turns out he was right. They ended up talking for hours. Charlie was completely worked up. He yelled that he knew from the very beginning that Kim Shin's ex-wife was bad news. Kim Shin admitted he didn't realize how bad it was back then. Charlie just called him a tough bastard for surviving a year in that hell, saying he would have given up after a single day. Kim Shin figured that at least getting rich from crypto was a kind of financial therapy. He mentioned that plenty of people in America had struck it rich the same way. Charlie explained that America was full of crypto fanatics, even people who create their own coins just hoping to hit the jackpot. Then, he casually offered to make one for Kim Shin. Creating a coin, the thought had never even crossed his mind. But considering how many new coins flooded the market after Bitcoin, it actually made sense. The idea of creating something new started to take hold. He looked over at his friend. He had something important to ask. He asked Charlie if he knew a guy named Khan. Turns out Khan was a programming expert living in America. At that moment, he was just having a meal with his friends, Chris and Helena. The idea of creating his own coin had sparked something bigger. This wasn't just about making more money anymore. It was about building something from the ground up. He looked at Charlie and asked him a simple but huge question. How do you even start a company? Charlie just stared at him. He figured his friend must be drunk. But Kim Shin insisted he was serious. He asked why the sudden interest, and Shin explained he got curious after seeing their friends, Chris and Helena. Charlie considered it for a moment. He told Kim Shin that if he was really serious, there were 3 things he believed were essential for any startup. He explained that the first thing you need is capital money, the second is a good idea. But then he paused, saying the third thing was the most important of all. He pointed his drink right at Kim Shin. The third thing, he said, was the CEO's ability. He explained that it doesn't matter how much money you have or how great your idea is. If the CEO doesn't have the skill to use them, it's all for nothing. Kim Shin was quiet, taking it all in. It was starting to sink in that this wasn't just about the money. He began to wonder what kind of abilities a CEO actually needed to succeed. Kim Shin thought about it, the CEO's ability. He felt like there had to be something more fundamental, something even more important than that. Charlie told him that running a company is incredibly hard. He figured if someone already has a ton of money, it's just smarter to invest it. That's when an idea hit Kim Shin. Charlie saw the look on his friend's face and got a bad feeling. He sighed, asking what he was thinking now. Kim Shin took a drink, a small smile on his face. He then asked his friend how exactly a person goes about investing in a company. The next day, they weren't in some fancy office. They were at an old-school burger joint called Father's Diner. And sitting across the table from them was the man they were there to meet. The man looked a little stunned. He asked if Kim Shin was serious about wanting to invest in his company, Aurora. Kim Shin just nodded and said that's exactly why he was there. The CEO admitted he was surprised to be having a business meeting in a hamburger joint. Kim Shin explained that their mutual friend, Khan, had told him he'd be more comfortable here than in some stuffy cafe. Kim Shin slid an envelope across the table. He told the CEO he'd done his homework on Aurora. He laid out the facts. Aurora was growing fast, their tech was solid, and they were already getting offers from major players. He then asked if they couldn't grow even faster with the right partner. The CEO explained they were already in investment talks with another company. But the guy looked stressed. He admitted that they were still trying to decide on the other offer. Something in his eyes shifted. That's when Kim Shin dropped the bomb. He knew the other company was trying to screw them over, demanding more of the company for less money on terrible terms. The CEO was speechless, asking how he could possibly know that. Kim Shin just tapped the envelope. He wasn't there to play games, he was there to be a partner. Kim Shin laid out his terms, $10 million for 20% stake in the company. The poor guy looked like he'd seen a ghost. He just looked at him calmly. That was his offer as a partner to Aurora. Take it or leave it. The CEO was sweating. The number Kim Shin had just put on the table was beyond anything he had imagined. Kim Shin, on the other hand, didn't even blink. He was dead serious. Still trying to get his thoughts straight, the CEO said he needed to review the documents first. The whole meeting was happening over burgers. Khan, the guy who'd set this all up, was just enjoying his meal. The CEO of Aurora sat across from them, looking over the papers carefully. Suddenly, Khan spoke up, calling out the CEO's counteroffer. He said that $700,000 for a 10% stake was an insultingly low number. The CEO immediately tried to shut him down, telling him to stay quiet. But Khan wasn't having it. He shot back that since he was the one who introduced Kim Shin to Aurora, he had every right to speak. And to prove he wasn't intimidated, he just calmly picked up a fry and took a bite. Then Khan came back with a new offer, $900,000 for 20% stake. The CEO, Chris, looked like he'd just been hit by a truck. Khan knew exactly what was going on. He explained that the other company trying to invest wasn't a partner, they wanted to swallow Aurora whole. He pointed out that if Chris joined hands with them, they'd just try to take over management. That's why the poor guy had been so conflicted. But Kim Shin, he said, wouldn't do that. He'd take his share, but that was just a fair deal for the investment. He had no plan to use his stake to control the company. All he wanted was to see Aurora grow. Khan told Chris to think carefully. He picked up a French fry. Was he going to choose the big company and eat a regular cheeseburger? He dropped the fry next to the burger on the plate. Or he asked, was he going to choose his friend and get a double burger instead? The choice was simple, a regular burger or a much better deal. Chris started sweating. He let out a nervous laugh. He looked over at Khan, who was just casually eating his burger. Chris had to admit when he put it that way, there was really only one choice. So Chris turned to Kim Shin and reached out his hand. He officially declared them partners. Kim Shin shook his hand with a confident smile. He told Chris that as an investor, he was excited to watch the company grow. With the deal done, everyone went their separate ways. Walking down the street, Kim Shin felt a sense of accomplishment. This was a satisfying first step. Even if the investment didn't work out, he knew it would be a valuable experience. But he knew he couldn't take all the credit. He thought about his friend Myung-woo. This was all thanks to him. Kim Shin realized none of this would have been possible without Myung-woo's connections. Back in Korea, Myung-woo suddenly felt his ears burning, wondering if someone was talking about him. He made a mental note to repay his friend properly soon. Over the phone, Myung-woo joked around, but Kim Shin just told him to stop messing with him. He was already fired up and asked for more companies to look into. Myung-woo had to remind him that he was supposed to be in America to rest, not work. That made him pause. He realized that back home he'd be stuck in the office right now. He couldn't help but wonder how everyone was doing. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of Murray Motors, things were not going well. The executive director, Jin Yo-young, was furious. She demanded to know why Aurora had rejected their investment proposal. Her employee explained that Aurora had just taken on a new investor. When she asked for the reason they were rejected, the answer was just baffling. Apparently, Aurora said they wanted double burgers instead of cheeseburgers now. She couldn't make any sense of it. A double burger, what was that even supposed to mean? Then her employee dropped another bomb. Metawave had also rejected their investment. Shocked, she demanded to know who had acquired them instead. The answer was completely unexpected. It wasn't a corporation. Turns out, a single person had invested in both Aurora and Metawave, which was almost unheard of. So just like that, they had lost two companies they'd been eyeing for a while. She had to admit, whoever this person was, they had an incredible eye for potential. She clenched her fist. This wasn't just business anymore. She turned to her employee and gave him a clear order: find out everything about this mystery investor. Their new goal was to take the shares he now held. She prided herself on knowing every major player in the industry. The idea that someone this sharp was operating completely under her radar was infuriating. She promised herself she would find him, no matter what it took. Of course, she had no idea the person causing all this chaos was just some guy having a good time with his friends. Meanwhile, back in Korea, the market was about to get ugly. The price of a popular crypto XP was sitting at 4,300. Then it started to drop fast. The numbers just kept plummeting. Online, people were losing their minds. They were practically sending out distress calls, asking what was happening as the price went into a nosedive. Someone called it the Great Depression, telling everyone to run. With XP down 50%, people were begging for someone to save them from their losses. And that panic quickly spilled over into the real world. At the office, a mob had formed, and they were demanding answers from assistant manager Na. They were all screaming at him. They said he told them to trust XP, and now that it had crashed, they wanted him to take full responsibility. One of the guys yelled that he'd lost $1 million in just a single week because of this. Another screamed that his entire fortune had just been cut in half. But in the middle of all the chaos, one woman just stood there silently, watching it all happen. The woman who had been watching from the side just stared, completely horrified by what was happening. Assistant manager Na was sweating, stammering as he tried to come up with an excuse. Then he just snapped. He started shouting at them, saying that everyone knew investments were risky. He asked if he'd held a knife to their throats and forced them to invest. Another colleague in the background just covered his face, completely speechless at the guy's nerve. That was the last straw for Jun-gi. He grabbed the scumbag by the collar. But instead of backing down, Na actually dared him to throw a punch, hoping he could get some settlement money out of it. The whole thing was getting out of control. Other employees rushed in, yelling for someone to stop Jun-gi before he did something he'd regret. But away from the shouting, one of the other employees just stood there, watching the whole mess unfold. He looked up at the sky, thinking to himself that this is what happens when you get greedy and hold on for too long instead of selling. He just stared at his phone full of regret. He should have sold when Shin did. If he had, he would have at least gotten his original investment back. But instead, he just watched the numbers on his screen keep dropping. And it wasn't a small drop either, it was a complete disaster. The poor guy was sweating bullets. He couldn't even stand to look at the screen anymore. While his coworkers were still screaming and fighting, he was just lost in his own world of misery. He let out a long sigh. He couldn't help but wonder what that lucky bastard Shin was up to right now. Turns out, while everyone back at the office was losing their minds, Shin was just taking some time for himself. This was a completely different story. A young man held a gun, his face slick with sweat. He looked like he was in serious trouble. The fight was happening in some small, isolated village out in the middle of nowhere. It looked like they were near a bus stop. Maybe that was their way out. Suddenly, he opened fire, blasting chunks out of a brick wall as he took cover. He yelled out to his friend Myung-woo, warning him that the odds were completely stacked against them. He insisted they had to pull out and find somewhere else to regroup. But when he looked over, his partner was already on the ground. It was over. Myung-woo just looked up defeated. He apologized, saying he was done for. Shin's eyes were wide with alarm. A shot rang out. The attacker was right on his heels as Shin screamed out for Myung-woo. But it was too late. Myung-woo was already down, helpless on the ground. And just like that, Shin was taken down too. The enemy stood over him, completely victorious. The guy tightened his grip on his weapon. Shin could only stare up, waiting for the end. And then the guy pulls out a frying pan. Turns out this whole intense battle was just a video game, and this clown was just messing with them. The whole enemy team started ganging up on them. Shin's character was furious, yelling at them to stop mocking him and just finish the game already. And then it was over, the game ended. No chicken dinner for them tonight. Myung-woo was furious, complaining that the other team played dirty. They had lost again, but Shin just looked amused. His friend immediately demanded a rematch, telling Shin to hurry up and make a new room so they could play again. But as they were getting ready, Shin was thinking about how much Myung-woo had helped him with the startup investments. He tried to thank him by gifting him a house. It seemed like the right thing to do at the time. Turns out Myung-woo was extremely uncomfortable with it. He insisted he wasn't looking for anything in return and firmly refused the offer. So Shin found a different way to thank him. And honestly, his friend's reaction this time was priceless. He'd set up a room with every console system imaginable and all the latest games. The place was basically every gamer's dream. Myung-woo was so overwhelmed he just dropped to his knees. Myung-woo finally agreed to accept the house, but only on one condition: they had to be roommates. Later, while they were gaming, Shin suddenly mentioned he was thinking of going backpacking for a while. Myung-woo was surprised, asking if his vacation was really that long. Shin just casually explained that he'd already spoken to his team leader and gotten it extended. Myung-woo paused for a second, thinking about it. Backpacking, that actually sounded pretty fun. That's when an idea sparked. He turned to Shin and asked if he could make a request too. He wanted to know if he could come along. Shin paused, thinking it over for a moment. His friend just grinned, saying his request was pretty similar to Shin's. And just like that, their backpacking trip was on. So the trip began. And pretty quickly, a woman sleeping on Shin's shoulder became part of the journey. Inside his head, though, Shin was freaking out. He had no idea how things had ended up like this. This was supposed to be a normal backpacking trip, just a simple vacation. But while the poor guy was having a crisis, she was sleeping like a baby, completely at ease.